The following program is a presentation of BaseNet Internet Television.
I'm breathing fire. We can't live without. I'm breathing fire. We can't live without. I'm breathing fire.
And that was Marissa Levy with Breathing Fire, and we're breathing fire today on the Crash and Glass podcast. I'm your host, Holly Hurley, here with my co-host, Jill Hindley. And we have two special guests today, Scarlett Reeves and Summer Willis. Hi, ladies.
Hi. Hi.
So obviously, you know Jill and I, so we want to learn a little bit about our guest today. Our topic for today is with chick, as in with child. And these two ladies are more or less professionals on being with chick and or what happens thereafter. So Scarlett, tell us a little bit about what you do.
I am currently a PhD candidate at the University of Utah, studying reproductive and perinatal epidemiology. And what my research focuses on right now is looking at the health disparities in infertility treatment use and access to infertility treatment with Hispanic and minority women.
Wow, that's
and
awesome.
I'm an 18-month-old.
Yeah. Go ahead, Summer.
I'm a critical care nurse at a hospital here in town, and I have a 2-year-old little girl and a almost 8-week-old little boy. But during nursing school, I focused on nursery and L&D. I didn't actually end up going into that once I started working, but I'm sort of familiar with that. I also have a biology degree before I did my nursing, and studied developmental biology. So I know a little bit about the biology behind it, but I think my expertise here is more like from the nursing standpoint and from the mom standpoint.
Well, also, I love Summer and I have been friends a very long time, so I can brag on her a little bit and say that she was cum laude in biology. So, she's very good at it.
And Summer, the fact that you're on this podcast tonight with an 8-week-old is as impressive a feat as cum laude.
Oh yeah, he's right here at my feet. I was rocking him with my foot in his little bouncer. He's sleeping, so hopefully he'll remain that way throughout this podcast.
So Holly, as a review, Holly comes to us from St. Louis, where she's getting her MBA at Washington University. And I'm Jill, and I am here in Boston, and I actually am working part-time and home part-time with my 2 kids who are 8 and 6. So they feel ancient. So I've been a few years out of the baby stage, I guess. And then I just wanted to ask Scarlett and Summer, if you would tell everyone what cities you guys are in right now and how long you've been there?
I actually live in St. Louis, and we've only been here. We moved last summer, my boyfriend and I, but right now I'm in Miami visiting my mother.
Oh, okay. But you're in St. Louis right now. Okay, it's your home base.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in Marshall, Texas, and I've grown up here. We've moved about here and there around East Texas area, but for the most part, we've been around this area forever.
So. Oh, okay, thanks. I just wanted to I'm very geographical. I just wanted to hear where everyone was coming from.
So I guess we'll kick off with our first topic today. Ladies, we want to talk a little bit about sort of getting pregnant and the process behind it. Are there more effective ways to have sex to get pregnant? Is my first question right out of the gate.
We don't pussyfoot around here.
That's right.
So to speak.
I'd like to try to answer that, if you don't mind, Summer.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
So one of the things that I was really excited to learn about as a master's student was what the prime days for conception are in a woman's menstrual cycle. You go through high school, and I'm sure as women you guys have all felt this to some extent or another, where you think, at one point, oh, if, a boy even touches me down there, I'm going to get pregnant. It's sort of that kind of scare tactic, and they don't really give you all the information that you need to know how reproduction occurs. And so when I got to studying public health and studying reproduction and everything, I learned that there are certain days in a menstrual cycle where you're more likely to conceive, and a lot of women don't know when that is. It's sort of called your peak day of conception, where the probability of conception per month is about 35%. So if you sort of time your intercourse around that peak day, or 1 to 2 days before peak, which is when you ovulate, then your chances of getting pregnant are higher. And that's also tied to the mucus that your cervix makes, that during the rest of the month, it's if you look at it under a microscope, it's all crisscrossy and very sort of hostile environment for sperm to navigate. And it's almost nearly impossible for them to get through that cervical barrier. But during that peak day, or the 1 to 2 days before ovulation, it forms these awesome little tiny channels where the sperm can swim up really easily into the cervix and into the uterus to the fallopian tube. So that's something that I know a lot of women don't know. But as far as positions and, styles of trying to get pregnant, it really doesn't matter, as long as you're focusing more around those days to try to conceive, if you're trying to get pregnant.
I know some are like, our group of friends always talks about like letting it like putting your hips up and like letting it
marinate.
What was that word?
You gotta let it marinate. You can't just get up and run to the bathroom. You gotta kind of hang out a minute. I am a believer in the old hip tilt on the pillow, because that's how I got pregnant the first time.
I thought that you used a very scientific term at first, and then it was the word marinate. That's so funny. It's perfect.
Oh yeah.
Well, I saw the Oprah with Steven Tyler I guess it was this past week, the week before, and he said that tearful, emotional sex is what creates a baby.
Okay.
I'm not really sure there's any science behind that.
Steven Tyler said this?
Yes.
Well,
he said every time he conceived one of his daughters, he cried during sex.
Oh my goodness.
Oh,
I'm surprised he had any more children after the first one.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising, really, actually. But so obviously, some women have, and I know, Scarlett, this is a big one for you. Some women have difficulty getting pregnant, and at what point do you think it's actually more than just like not normal? At what point should you look into other treatments, and what can be some barriers?
Well, clinically, they say that it's 12 months of trying without getting pregnant, and that's what the doctors try to stick to. Some women, depending on your age, if you're over 35 and you've tried for 6 months or so, then they say, come in, and they'll probably start you on treatment sooner than having you wait for another year. So that's usually the cutoff point. But if you're timing, a lot of women don't know when to time the intercourse, and so they're just doing it kind of nilly-willy and are missing it, but are completely fertile, and they're just missing that window. So
maybe sort of look into your timing and like consult someone about your timing before you go full in vitro and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, get in touch with your cycle, and get involved with yourself, and try to figure out when you're ovulating and time it around there, so that you when you come in, if you think you have a problem, you'll be armed with all that knowledge and say, look, this is when I'm menstruating, this is when I think I'm ovulating, and we're having intercourse around this time, but it's not working, and then they'll take you more seriously and start treatment right away.
So for like the women who are not really yet, I feel like it's such a touchy subject sometimes for girls to talk about menstruation, and for women who aren't really in touch with their cycle, when does ovulation happen in response to like your actual bleeding of your cycle?
So usually, they say about 14 days, but take that with a grain of salt, because my cycle is about 33 days long each month. From the day you start menstruating, it's about 14 days after that when you start ovulating. But like I said, it changes with each person. So.
And Scarlett, don't they say that you can take your temperature, and if when your temperature kind of spikes in the month, that might be an indication, and also the thickness of your discharge?
Exactly. So you take your temperature, but studies have shown that when women do that and try to get pregnant, they usually miss ovulation. So you ovulate, and then your temperature spikes after you ovulate. So the window is before you ovulate. That's when you really want to get in there. So one way of looking at that is looking at your cervical mucus, which is like your discharge, and seeing when it's a certain sensation and whatever. And it's all these regulations that you have to look at, and it'll tell you, okay, this is your fertile period. This is when you should be having sex.
Huh. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I guess because you guys may have had different experiences, but like for me, since I've never like put an effort into getting pregnant, obviously I'm still at the phase in my marriage where I'm sort of putting effort into not getting pregnant.
Important too.
Exactly. It's like, I think sometimes that, it can be really difficult for women. You spend like half your life trying not to get pregnant, and then girls who have fertility problems have the typical like Charlotte from Sex and the City moment where they're like, I could have just been screwing everything that moves all the time and I would have never gotten pregnant.
You know what I think is so interesting about what you were just, about the days and the, watching like the different signs of your body when's the right time, the optimal time, and you look back on the generations before us, and you think, they figured this out without all the science that we have now. They a lot of the women who were, we'll go back, I don't know, 100 years or, 80, 75 years ago, or more, they had that sort of figured out when they knew their bodies, and they were learning this from their mothers and their grandmothers and their older sisters. And I just think it's so neat, because even though we learn more and more science-wise, but it always, I feel like we can still go back, and a lot of times women's instincts are the one that things that guide us.
Oh, definitely. And I think we've lost that a little bit, as science has progressed, and the more sort of medical advances in technology and knowledge that we have, it's kind of separated us from that innate sense of this is how my body is supposed to be working, and in tuneness with your own body, which is really important. And I think a lot of girls growing up now don't have that.
Well, and how much do you think that plays a factor into the difficulty that people have getting pregnant, and then even some issues during pregnancy? I know for my sister, she was very stressed out about delivering with her first child, and she ran into a lot of difficulty with it. And I wonder how much of that, like, sort of separation of emotional versus what's actually happening in there is sort of to blame for some of the more clinical issues we have. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think stress and the emotional, it's like the whole story you hear, people go in into fertility clinics and they do, 8 cycles of insemination and 3 cycles of IVF, and then they stop and they're fed up, and, the woman goes on binge drinking or whatever, and then a month later she's pregnant. And so it's the whole like, screw it, I'm just going to let whatever happens, and your body just sort of falls into place. And you kind of hear that anecdotally. There's no evidence to support that, but they do say that stress is sort of linked to getting pregnant and how long you maintain the pregnancy, how healthy your pregnancy is, definitely.
And now, obviously along those lines, let's say, once a woman goes into like an IVF situation or goes through that sort of process, is there any sort of things that women should be aware of going into that? Any sort of indicators, any sort of trouble spots, or just sort of what to be prepared for when you go into a situation like that? As
far as what to watch out for when you're going into in vitro, like what to take?
Yes, okay. Definitely.
So in vitro is usually like the last line of treatment for women who are having difficulties. And it's very invasive. And basically what happens is a woman either gives her own eggs to be fertilized, or she uses a donor's eggs, and they're fertilized outside of her body. So sort of like the Petri dish baby. They take sperm and they fertilize the egg. And so that whole manipulation outside of the body introduces what a lot of researchers think is, it could lead to congenital or developmental problems later on in life. And so you have to remember that along with, IVF being that sort of intense, invasive treatment, the probability of achieving live birth is lower than if you've had, natural conception. So like if you're under 35 and going in for IVF, your chances of conceiving are higher, about 36%, versus women who are 40 and older, who their chances are about 10%. So you have to take that into account. Plus, the probability of having multiple births, it increases the morbidity, like what happens to the babies, low birth weight. A lot of these mothers have harder deliveries, or they may do cesarean. And, so a lot of these things that happen during pregnancy and during the delivery are increased for women who try IVF. Although it's a wonderful thing, wonderful technology, there's just associated risks with having done it. And then mental risks as well, the whole process of it.
It sounds, from good friends of mine, it sounds like that emotional process is so trying, and almost to the point where, the idea of it not working after all of that, all the attempts of the IVF, and if it doesn't work in the end, it seems like it's almost more devastating than where they were at the beginning, when they weren't getting pregnant naturally. Definitely. I just to throw out not to go in too much of a different direction, but I just wonder sometimes about the IVF path versus an adoption path, and if either of you have counseled women on that or have come across that, professionally or personally with, friends or colleagues, where you just, do you go definitely try, do you encourage everyone to go towards IVF, or is adoption discussed early on, or is it sort of the what happens after IVF doesn't work?
I don't counsel a lot of women who undergo infertility. I just gather their information, whatever. But, for some of my friends who have undergone it, I know that adoption is sort of like the last resort, and it's knowing as much as I do about the risks associated with IVF and, the monetary and emotional input that them as a couple have to put in, it's sort of, but it's kind of taboo to talk about it, like you don't want to be like, oh, don't even try it, because you want to give them that option of trying to get pregnant on their own. But it's sort of like they go into adoption at the very end sort of having given up a little bit, and it's just not the most ideal situation. I don't know. Summer?
No,
that was go ahead.
Either that, but obviously it's a very individual choice. I'm sure that the couples who consider in vitro have thought about adoption and thought about all of those things too. But I think there's this draw to experience pregnancy and also to, produce a child from your own genetics, basically.
Yeah.
I think that's the draw. Yeah.
If you and Brian hadn't been able to get pregnant together, would you have considered in vitro or adoption, or either or both?
I think that I would have considered adoption before in vitro, but that's just my personal preference.
What about you, Scarlett?
Likewise, yeah. I think that it's just too much money and too much emotional investment too. I wasn't that tied to having a biological child if it didn't work.
Yeah, so let's say, all right, now you've gone through the process, you're definitely pregnant. You think you might be pregnant. Let's start with you think you might be pregnant. What do you do?
Well, when I first got pregnant, it was sort of I wouldn't call it a surprise, but, it was definitely an adjustment. And the first thing I went and did was I went to the store and bought the folic acid prenatal supplements. And that's, I stopped my alcohol intake and went to bed early that night and thought, got to take better care of myself. So that was my first thing that I did.
What about you, Summer?
Oh, when I thought I might be pregnant, I just went and got the pregnancy test and took it. And, a couple of times I thought I was pregnant and I wasn't, and there was always that disappointed feeling. But, once I was, it was, I was taking, once we decided to have a kid, I got on prenatals and everything. And so, it was just kind of like, oh, okay, we're pregnant. Especially the first time, my heart was just pumping so fast when I saw that positive test, and I was like, well, there's no turning back now. So,
Exactly.
Well, now the prenatal vitamins, as you're trying, is that something you'd recommend for most women?
Yeah, my doctor did. Whenever I discuss getting pregnant, it's like, well, go on ahead and get on prenatals. They're not going to hurt you. If you're not pregnant, it's not going to hurt anything.
I know that this wasn't. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Scarlett.
Well, even when they say, even if you're in childbearing age and there is even a remote chance of getting pregnant, that you should be on those pills. But I think it's nice, like Summer said, it's nice to take, and it's not going to hurt you. But I think everything's supplemented with folic acid, now, so it's not such a huge scare as it is, in some developing countries or something, but.
Right. I had actually run out of my prenatals before I found out I got pregnant the second time, and I was on a regular vitamin for about 30 days when I found out I got pregnant, and I asked my doctor about it. He's like, no, it's fine. There's plenty of folic acid in that. So
I think that the women's, how they now vitamins are catered towards different, men and women in different age groups. So I know that most vitamins, multivitamins for women, do have that at least that minimum amount of folic acid that they recommend. And I know that I'm trying to get pregnant. Certainly now. I think I'm done with that. But I actually hear that you take those. It's so good for, it's good for your hair and your skin. So I just take that folic acid even now. So I think
Well, speaking of like supplementing your diet, I'm going to be the one to ask this. And my husband was listening; he would laugh hysterically. But I've heard there's some research that supports having very moderate amounts of alcohol even during your pregnancy. How good is that? Are we there yet?
One of the saddest things for me to give up was my nightly red wine. So I really looked into it. I talked to a couple of my
love my nightly red wine. Sorry, go ahead.
and she was like, okay, off the record, I don't think it's such a big deal to have, a few glasses a week or whatever of red wine or whatever. And, in Europe, they definitely advise women to, where is it, Ireland? They advise them to drink Guinness because of the level of folate in Guinness.
I said, that is so interesting.
And, there was this one study, and, their hearts were in the right place, but it was this NGO group that went to, like, Nepal or Tibet, and they were trying to get pregnant women to stop drinking, these rural farming pregnant women. And what happened when they took away they told them, they just said, don't drink, and then they took away their alcohol or whatever, and the level of spina bifida increased, which is a result of not having enough folic acid. And so they realized that the bulk of the folate that these women were getting was in the beer. And so they were like, okay, have the beer, but boil off all the alcohol first. So it definitely won't, I don't want to say do it, but there's no like minimum amount shown that you can drink. They can't do studies on it where they have a bunch of pregnant women. It's like, okay, you drink one drink and you drink 5 and let's see what turns up. They don't know that. So the government just says don't at all. I've just heard and seeing that there's no, if you have 1 or 2 a week or whatever, it's fine. You don't need to worry about it. But other people may disagree a lot with me. It's contentious.
So what are some things like? Oh, go ahead, Summer.
Oh, I was just going to say that's, I heard the same thing that, a drink now and again isn't going to hurt anything. Sometimes I think it's hard for people to just have a drink now and again, so it's best just maybe not.
So in those first 3 months, what sort of changes can you expect in your body? How is your body going to start acting differently? Besides the fact that it's growing a baby.
Right. One of the first things that I noticed was that even before I took the test to get pregnant, I was peeing a lot, like every 3 hours peeing. And I'm not the type of person who drinks water all the time and goes pee every hour. So for me, it was a lot of pee. And then my breasts were really tender and swollen, even like those first few weeks. So it kind of gave me an indication that I was pregnant before I even knew.
What about you, Summer?
Breast tenderness was my first symptom. The first 3 months, I was really tired.
And how about morning sickness? How common is that? How big of a worry is it? How often does it happen for most women?
I'm not sure how often it happens. It didn't happen to me. I got sick twice, I think, during my first trimester, and that's it. But they say that it's a good sign that your body's responding normally and healthily to the pregnancy if you do have morning sickness. So it's nothing to be worried about. And for women who do have really bad morning sickness, I know that their doctors prescribe them something to help them through that nausea and everything.
I think that a lot of times, correct me if this is not true, but that the nausea almost comes from the empty stomach and, just not being able, because your probably your metabolism kicks up and you're just going through those nutrients so quickly that it seems that keeping something literally on hand to snack on, something healthy and substantial, is smart. Because personally for me, I didn't have quote unquote morning sickness, just random nausea. It was actually just when I was hungry, and you just so quickly start to feel almost over hungry, this nauseous feeling. And as soon as you eat something that's that calms you down and fills your stomach, I felt fine.
So moving into, is there anything else you guys think people should be aware of during the first semester? The first semester.
You've got school on your brain.
Indeed.
I have a question for the guests about whether it's the first trimester or moving into the second trimester, basically about physical activity. I know that a lot of times, as you both have mentioned, that first trimester, you're so tired and it's hard. It's just the day to day, what you have to do in a day, working and whatever you're up to, or taking care of an older, your older child is enough enough physical work. But I do have women ask me or talk about running and exercise as they move through their pregnancy, and I just wondered about that because I know that they say there's nothing wrong with doing activity all the way up till almost the end, until as long as you're comfortable. But I just wondered from a more the nursing perspective or the professional perspective about like running. I know that for me, I had been a runner for a long time before I got pregnant, but by the time I was like 5 months, or maybe 6 months, so I was still in that second trimester, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel comfortable to go out for a run or a jog. So I just wondered if you had was there any research or anything about that?
Well, in Summer, I know this one's kind of personal for you, actually. Oh,
yeah, I was really interested in that because I love to work out. I was the same way, though. They say, as long as you don't have a complicated pregnancy, you can continue doing what your body's used to doing throughout your pregnancy. But I was like you. I didn't feel comfortable running after I got to a certain size.
Right.
And I think it's important just to listen to your body and just kind of alter your workout based on what you feel is comfortable. I mean, I think any doctor would tell you listen to your body at that point, So.
I agree. I did a lot of yoga. I wasn't, a runner or anything like that, so it wasn't as high impact, but I did a lot of yoga, and what I learned from that was that, you start using different muscles, especially in your back, to support your, growing gut, and like your legs start getting more sore. So we did a lot of stretching and, toning of those muscles. So that was really helpful for me to do something sort of low impact, but still getting my body moving. And I agree with Bill and Summer had to say with, like doctors just recommend, as if you're comfortable, keep doing it, I mean, I asked the doctor if I could go skiing one time, and they were like, I don't think past the second semester or trimester it's a good idea, but, Yeah.
Nothing that would cause any trauma is recommended. I think like skiing, you could bust kind of hard and stuff. But also, I know after the first trimester, they tell you not to work out on your back, not to do crunches or anything where you're on your back. You can do things on your side. You can do planks. You can alter your workouts to hit the same muscle groups, but they just want you off your back.
Well, and I know, when I was personal training, I got my pre- and postnatal certification so that I could, train people. And I know Summer and I talked a lot during that time. And the lady I got my certification from, her name is Annette Lang. And when Summer got pregnant the second time, I actually sent her one of Annette's little portfolios that she does. She does like a little easy-to-use like card set that tells you like at what point during your pregnancy they recommend stopping doing what and ways to alter exercises so you can be more comfortable. And I would feel very comfortable recommending that to women who can't afford a personal trainer during that time or want to keep working out but don't know what's safe. She's sort of one of the foremost. She was a physical therapist before she was a personal trainer, and a lot of the research that's been done on exercise science for pregnant women she's been a part of. So I could really recommend that, as a professional, not as a pregnant lady.
And another great tip about...
I don't want to do this, I'm sorry. But we're going to lose Summer soon, so
okay.
We need to get her final thoughts because I think she's going to be on about
Let's do that. I was just going to say, Holly, that swimming's always so good as well because it works all the muscles, but it's no impact, or low impact.
So, Summer, anything that you want to share that we haven't gotten to yet before you have to go?
The thing that was really important to me was just the postpartum period. I had a really rough 3-month postpartum period with my first child. And I guess I would just want women to know that that is short-lived and you can get through that. It's like when they hit the 3-month, it's like, okay, I see a light at the end of the tunnel, and then it just gets better and better and better. I did not enjoy those first 3 months. And that's normal, So.
Well, what were some ways that you were able to cope with that?
Talking to other women who had children, or especially recently had children, who could remember going through those things. It was sort of depression. I didn't have it to where I had to be treated for it, but it was just this gloomy feeling and anxious and all of that, and then just this, oh my God, what have I done? My life has completely changed, and I wasn't so sure it was for the better. And, to hear those women say, you know what, you're in the the roughest part right now, and it's going to get so much better. And they were right. I've done it once and decided to do it again on purpose. So that just goes to show that it gets so much better.
Well, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, do people is it oh, am I echoing here? Is it common to be treated for postpartum depression with medication? I mean, is that something that again from a professional viewpoint, do you see that a lot?
Yeah, I hear a lot of doctors prescribing Lexapro or something like that for women postpartum if they're really struggling with that.
Well, thanks for joining us, Summer. I know that you have to slide off, so we're going to finish out the show with Scarlett, but I really appreciate you coming calling in and spending time with us today.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thank you, Summer.
Hi, Summer. Thank you.
Take care of those little kids, those little babies.
I will, thanks.
So, Scarlett, I guess we'll go back at this point to the time, during the term. And, you were talking about when you exercise, your body's changing, the muscles in your back change. What are some of those changes you can expect as your body sort of adapts to the size?
One thing that I had a lot of problem was lower back pain. Not everybody has it, but it really, really, influenced my quality of life. I went to physical therapy, and then I went to a chiropractor, and going to the chiropractor really, really helped me. And then I suffered a lot from pain in my hips, and I think part of that was just having to lay on my side all the time. I had this huge, I called it the monster pillow that went, around my head, around my back, and around my front, and it would hug me as I would lie on my side, but it would put a lot of pressure, lying on my side would put a lot of pressure on my hips, so I'd wake up every morning and just horrible hip pain. And that goes back to the whole thing about lying on your back. Once your baby gets to a certain size, it puts a lot of pressure on an aorta that you have going down from your chest into your stomach, and it could cut off the blood flow. So that's why they say don't lay on your back, don't do exercises on your back past a certain stage. So that was one of the most difficult things, the way my body was changing, that I experienced. I mean, thankfully I didn't get any stretch marks or anything like that, so I was pretty lucky. But I did have bad hip pain.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of women say that, and I also hear about a lot of tightness in the piriformis, which is, deep inside the booty, that essentially, a lot of times women's butt gets really tight and just hurts from that anterior tilt.
Interesting. I didn't have that, but that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I know there are some stretches you can do for that, but a lot of times you need someone's help with that, so that's a good place to call your husband, especially once you can't lay on your back anymore. It's really hard to get in there like you need to. And what are some ways of managing that kind of adjustment and pain that you'd recommend?
Well, like I said, I went to a chiropractor. Some women, I had friends of mine go to get, what is that thing called with the needles?
Amniocentesis?
No.
No. Oh, you mean? I'm sorry. Woo.
What did you say, Phil?
No, I said amniocentesis because I'm thinking of a big needle. Do you mean acupuncture?
I meant acupuncture, yeah.
That other A word.
Exactly, yeah, not amniocentesis. So that's helped some of my friends with some of the pain that they've had. But I was kind of, worried and a little bit skeptical, but it's helped. The chiropractic did a really just amazing job, so I would recommend that too.
I also know you have an increase in relaxin that makes and I think I had clients who were constantly worried about well, my joints are loose right now. Can I do all this physical activity while my joints are loose? How much of an effect does that actually have on your movement?
Oh, I'm the most horrible person to ask because I'm super bendy and so I really didn't notice at all, not even a little bit. And yeah, I'm the wrong person to ask. But I hear that it happens.
I never really knew what to do with that because, that it's sort of something you can't, your joints are not something you can control. I would counsel women to build up their stabilizers and increase their core strength just to sort of protect their joints. Mm-hmm. But there's not really a lot you can do about the actual stretching out. It just seems like that's sort of what happens,
Right, yeah.
And I'm sure yoga, prenatal yoga, as I know we were talking just earlier, that I would think would make a world of difference for the muscles and joints, keeping them feeling, just fluid and a little bit better.
Right, and then during the practice, they tell you to watch out for that, don't overextend your knee, and when you're doing this kind of bend, be careful to, keep your joints supple or whatever, so they really guide you through that. And
This may be taking sort of a step back a little bit, but I know, Scarlett, your research is on certain kinds of problems and certain kinds of populations. What are some of the differences that you see that you're working on in your research?
Well, two major differences that I think are really interesting. The first one is I'm studying a group of Hispanic women, and they, as a group, like immigrant Hispanic women. Have you guys heard of that whole thing, like with the Japanese women, they have lower breast cancer rates, but then when they come and immigrate to this country, the breast cancer rates increase to what Americans have? Have you guys heard of
No, I
that?
didn't know that.
Wow.
Well, it's kind of the same thing, but it's with immigrant, mostly Mexican and Central American women coming into the United States. They have better birth outcomes, even though they have less prenatal care. And they think it's because, they have such a sense of family and community and like those traditional listening to your body type of practices and everything. And they're able to deliver healthier babies than the rest of the American population. So that's one interesting thing about Hispanic women as a subgroup. Another interesting thing is living in Utah. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Mormonism, but that's like the...
A little bit. Yeah.
I wouldn't say that some of my research hasn't come from the show Big Love, but that's not necessarily all Mormons. That's a very small subset, right?
Very small, yeah. I don't think I've ever met a polygamist. Seen them, but I've not met one. But yeah, it's a very interesting culture, and I think a lot of it centers around family, and so Mormons tend to have really large families. And the emphasis on getting married early, as soon as the boy gets back from his mission at age 20, he should get married soon thereafter. So you get these young couples, 20, 21, 22, who are coming into infertility clinics wanting Clomid, which is an ovulation-enhancing drug, because they can't get pregnant. And they've only been trying for 3 to 6 months. And these doctors are prescribing Clomid to them. They're basically overtreating a very young population who has no fertility problems at all. And this young population is going off to have, twins and triplets at a higher rate than regular. And it's all because of that societal push to procreate and have a large family. I mean, definitely not universal in Utah, but you do see a lot of it in the clinics, a lot of these young women coming in.
Wow, that's really fascinating to me, because you also, I know because nowadays we have babies a lot later, and they talk about how that helps the children become more well-adjusted adults, but that it hurts the birth rate and that it hurts the healthy pregnancy, and I know your difficulty in pregnancy skyrockets after the age of 35. So you would think that them having babies earlier would actually lead to a healthier baby population, as opposed to them going in at 3 months and getting medicated. Like that makes me so sad, because that could be a potentially really healthy situation.
Right.
Yeah, that's shocking. I'm shocked about that.
It is. It's really sad. These are such young people that, it's my personal opinion that they could have waited a few years and have, done more to live their life. But yeah, so it's sort of a trade-off with these young kids getting, and Clomid, the ovulation enhancing drug, isn't as bad per se as IVF or anything, but it's still medicating to achieve a result that you could do it naturally just by waiting a few months. And then if people having kids older, that whole magic number of 35 years, that is the age that, spontaneous abortions or miscarriages happen to increase more frequently, and you get higher incidence of Down syndrome or other chromosomal abnormalities. So there's a reasoning for having kids at a younger age, but Holly's right that they do seem more adjusted if women wait and are more accomplished in their life and have lived a little before they start churning them out.
Scarlett, I have a quick Clomid question before we sort of move on. So if you, when you're taking Clomid, then it's actually, will you explain it for me? And then also, when you stop taking it, let's say it works and you get pregnant, does it stay in your system at all, or is there any effect that would go on to a future pregnancy if you stop taking it altogether? But would there be any lingering effect?
I don't think so. Some people take Clomid consecutively for a year or more. There haven't been a lot of studies that I know of that have looked at into the future how it has affected the chance of conception, or if people conceived, how it affected their children. But I know that doctors aren't they don't hesitate to prescribe it continuously. You know, they used to think, they did similar studies with contraceptives, and that women who were on contraceptives for a very long time, oral contraceptives for a very long time, had a harder chance of getting pregnant after they stopped. But that isn't as true anymore with the newer contraceptives. So, but I'm not sure about the Clomid. I just know that doctors do prescribe it frequently as the first course of treatment a lot of the time, and they don't necessarily stop at like a certain time point. Like they don't say, "Oh, 6 months is too long, let's cut off." So
what are the sort of hesitations? I know when I was before I became sexually active, I had discussed the possibility of taking birth control with my doctor because I was irregular and had some other things going on. And my doctor actually advised me against it because he said, you know, you don't want to be putting other things in your body before it's absolutely necessary. What are some of the side effects that people still worry about with birth control? What are some of the problems people still have even with some of the advances? And are there any lingering effects of those?
I think, and this is not my area of research, but what I little know of it is that contraceptives have an impact on your vascular system, so like your heart and your blood vessels and stuff, and that it can cause strokes to happen. And so I think that the different varying levels, like you have, you know, the Yaz and the Ring, and they're all different doses of estrogen. And, you know, for some women it gives them migraines. For some women it leads to weight gain, although not much anymore. Those are the older versions. You know, I'm not sure. I think they're getting better at it. But I agree with your doctor. If you're not sexually active, then it's best not to start taking them. Although, you know, for women with like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, or for those women who have irregular cycles and need to have or want regular cycles, birth control pills really do the job of regulating that.
Well, and to get back to sort of being pregnant, I'm going to ask the uncomfortable question of pot with children, marijuana use with the...
Oh, I thought you said hot, and I'm like, hot what?
Yeah, hot-blooded, hot flash. No, actually, pot. I said marijuana.
Got it.
Because there are areas in the country now where it's not particularly illegal, but obviously with that comes there's not any really solid regulation. And, you know, what's the research on I know there is a lot out there on the effects of marijuana on pregnancy, both during, before, and after.
You know, this is horrible, but what I've read is that there's not much of an effect. The effect is, you know, similar to cigarettes. When you smoke, it decreases the blood flow to the rest of your body because you're taking in a lot of smoke into your lungs. So that's one of the main issues. But as far as neurological effects, what I've read is that it really doesn't show that there is an effect. Which is not to say that women should go off and you know, get high when they're pregnant by any means, but research shows that for all this scaremongering that goes on about marijuana and whatever, it really doesn't have that effect on future children. Although with men who do it consistently for a long period of time, it does affect their sperm production drastically. So if you're trying to get pregnant and your boyfriend or husband is smoking pot a lot, then cut it out. Sperm generates fairly easily. So.
I know we started out talking about alcohol during pregnancy, and I find it so interesting when trends, or when things, the pendulum swings all the way, from one side all the way to the other, and then inevitably it ends up back in the middle once there's more and more information. And so it seems like with drinking, a glass, like Summer I think mentioned, a glass or two of wine a week, or even when you're going to other countries, and the Irish, and they recommend that it's okay to have a moderate or a minimal to moderate amount, and even when you're pregnant. And I just think it's funny because I think, again, it started out where probably women weren't changing that habit so much, and then there was this uptick in fetal alcohol syndrome, right, where they were saying, well, there's too much alcohol, it's affecting the birth weights, and so then everything kind of went into action, and the pendulum swung all the way the other way, where women would be anxious if they had a drink between the time that they conceived until the time that the pregnancy test showed positive, and if they had a glass of wine or several drinks in that time, and they'd have a lot of anxiety about that one event, that one night of drinking. And I just think it seems now that it swung back to the middle. Is that true?
I think so. Like the same thing happened with me. When I found out I was pregnant, I remembered, I'm like, oh my gosh, Halloween, that was awful. I drank so much and totally going to ruin my baby, even though I knew that it's such an early stage. And then you go into the doctor, in my case, a midwife, and I was like, look, totally fit the clinical definition of binging on Halloween, and is this going to mess up my baby? Is it going to mess up my pregnancy? And she was like, oh, well, don't worry about it, very nonchalant about it. So, yeah, I think they're, like I said, they don't want to go on record of saying, yes, go ahead and drink, I, totally support you, but, I think on the off, they tell you on the side, like, don't beat yourself up over it. If you have a glass of wine every now and then, first, second, third trimester, it's not going to hurt.
So obviously, sort of getting back to our timeline, like when you move into that, like third trimester, what are some things that you can expect? Like what's normal for the third trimester?
Oh, wow.
Other than just being huge, and I've heard some people say very ready just to get rid of the baby, just to have it out of your body.
Yeah, very.
I don't know if you had that, but that was something a friend of mine told me.
Well, you hear about nesting, right? Nesting is an actual, like, instinctual phenomenon.
Yeah, definitely. It was funny because you read about that in all, the pregnancy books that you read, and it's like, okay, in the third trimester, you're going to start seeing yourself nesting, and which is like, you go crazy trying to make over your nursery or buying everything for the baby, or, you want everything to be ready for when the baby comes. And I would find myself thinking, oh, should I be nesting right now? And then try to nest. And then, was that nesting or was that, sort of suggestion? So I don't know if I ever really did it naturally. I think it was just power of suggestion from those books that sort of forced me to do sort of, quote unquote, the right thing,
Yeah, I was the same way. I think it was more of the power of suggestion.
Definitely. I think one of the major changes that I noticed in myself when in the third trimester was, like, the first trimester was such a state of, like, like you're a zombie, you're tired, and there's no really physical explanation that you can give to others if you're not telling them that you're pregnant, as far as, like, why you're tired. And then you're sort of getting adjusted to the whole idea of growing a person inside of you. And then your second trimester, I was sort of like, oh my gosh, this is great. My hair was thick and, like I wasn't breaking out anymore. It was just fantastic. And I was showing a little bit, so I got to buy all the cute maternity clothes. It was like my honeymoon phase. And by the third trimester, I was so pissed off every day. Like, it was, I really, not being resentful, but sort of, resentful of the fact that so much of my personal space was taken up by this thing that I didn't know and wasn't really that connected to. And I didn't have one of those lovely, like, oh, I love being pregnant feelings during my third trimester at all. So, like, that was the point where I was like, get it out of me. I cannot wait. If I go one day over my due date, I'll, die, sort of. So it was like that exasperated emotional feeling towards the end. That was the biggest change for me.
Now, I promise not to bring this up with WT, but did you find yourself just hating your spouse during that time? Bill Cosby always talks about, like, especially on the day of delivery, the woman being like, I hate you for doing this to me.
He was, I hated the fact that he got to have a peaceful night's sleep every night, and I still hate the fact that he gets a peaceful night's sleep every night. And that, that was really, really hard for me. But other than that, no, he was super supportive and really sweet. And we worked a lot on what I wanted for my birth, and that was really important. We worked with a doula, and he knew to shut up and not say anything. He knew to put water on my back, do whatever I told him to. So he was really, really good at the end and very, very caring.
And actually, Jill, I'm curious, did you hate your husband at any point during your pregnancy or delivery? You can be honest now.
I know. Oh, don't worry. I'm just trying to think of how to phrase this. During the pregnancy and the childbirth, I did not feel that feeling. I felt like we were in it, together, and I don't remember feeling so resentful, about sleeping during, the pregnancy. It was after, and I know we're sort of moving towards that next stage of the kind of those first few months after the baby comes, and that's when it got really hard, in that the resentfulness comes up, because the resentment, because I think that there's a base inequity, and this is one of the things I wanted to discuss, as doing this show, because I think that women aren't really prepared for that inequity, because we're not bred to just stay home, now anymore, in our generation now, to just stay home and have babies and have them, and then we become homemakers, and that's just what's expected because that's what has always happened, Well, so now we go to work, and we know what it's like to go out the door every day, and we know the pros and cons of having that full-time job and the pressures that come, but also the freedom that comes with that. And so when you're home, and even if it's just for a block of maternity leave before you go back to work, you're still home and you don't have freedom. And that resentment and the sleeping, like, Scarlett was saying, it's, even now, I mean, for her, it's that so you do start to feel that inequity, that you're your mother, and you really do have almost like this physical responsibility that's above and beyond. And I didn't feel it during the pregnancy. I felt it after the babies came.
Well, and obviously moving into delivery, Scarlett, I love that you said you actually, being a PhD in this and knowing all of the research there is to know, or maybe you know more now than you knew then. But, I had a friend who was training to be a doula, and one of the reasons why she went into the training is because she said a lot of the problems that we have with pregnancy in this country is because we treat it as an illness instead of as a natural part of the circle of life and the progression of things. And I was wondering what led you to that choice.
Oh, I totally agree. I think I read this one research paper about, I'd never heard of the word doula, and I was like, what a funny word. And I think it's Greek for like support or something like that. But just how birthing has always been, sort of about women. And if you look at animals and, any mammal that gives birth, they like to do it a certain way, like in the dark. They like to have peace and quiet around them. They like to be, in the moment. For women throughout all the ages, it's been about having the mother, the grandmother, or the aunts, or whatever there, helping women, supporting them, because ultimately they know exactly what you're going to go through, and they know exactly what is needed. After reading research about, how doulas helped improve the birth outcomes and birth experiences of women, I decided why not and give it a try. And so my first thing that I did was I hired a midwife to do all of my medical stuff instead of an OBGYN. And I know some great, awesome OBGYNs, but I didn't want to be, I was shooting for a natural birth as much as possible. And I didn't want to be pushed in the direction of having an induction or a cesarean section just because of a doctor's schedule or because this is how they did it in that hospital. I wanted to room in with my baby. I wanted to breastfeed it as soon as possible. I wanted to have skin-to-skin contact. And so all of these things midwives have been doing for years, and they really are a huge proponent. So that's what led me to have a midwife. And then a doula, since this was my first baby and not having my mother around to help me throughout the pregnancy and probably not going to be there during the delivery, I thought I really wanted to have a woman with me who knew what to do, who knew how to calm me down and get me through everything and get me to a place where I can have a natural birth. I mean, it didn't happen that way. I had an epidural, but I went 24 hours without any drugs and then got an epidural. And I only did it with the help of my boyfriend and the doula. So highly recommend them.
Yeah. 24 hours of labor.
Yeah.
And then in the epidural, and then it's almost like the exhaustion you must have had from the pain you had to, is that what kind of led you to that decision to have an epidural?
Well, it wasn't, yeah, I mean, the pain is it gets overwhelming and tiresome, going through it and knowing that you're going to have another wave of that contraction and thinking, okay, a next one and a next one, and you sort of lose it, you start losing it. But for me it was, the midwives don't check you as often, so I would go maybe 6 hours before they would check my cervix to see how dilated I was. Like 12 hours into my labor, they checked and they were like 5 centimeters, and I said, great, halfway there. And then 5 hours later, it was still 5 centimeters. Oh. So that was kind of like a deflating, I can't do this anymore, I'm not progressing. And I wasn't pushed in any way by the midwives to get an epidural, but I made that decision on my own. So
now, was that flipped or turned around or anything to cause that? Because I know my niece was sunny side up. My sister actually ended up getting an infection, having a huge high temperature. We were really afraid that Kira was going to have the toxic from breathing in the fluid, the amniotic fluid. we were worried she was going to be born sick, and she was born with a really high fever, but fortunately she was not, she hadn't breathed it in. But like, you know, I mean, what causes that? Like for it to happen for so long, and also for the dilation not to happen?
I think I'm not sure. I don't know what it was in my case. I think it varies. I mean, I'm sure there are physiological processes, like when, you know, there's times called shoulder dystrophy where your shoulder gets stuck in the birth canal, or the baby's shoulder, I'm sorry, and so the baby can't be pulled out, and so you're kind of stuck in labor that way. But I'm not sure what stops you from dilating.
And so there could be any number of things. It's not just like one thing. Yeah.
Well, I can say personally that the pelvic structure and size, I think the Dr. Myobe used the word pelvic arch, and it was just such that I was contracting, but he was not descending, you know, in a normal rate over the hours. And so I ended up having a cesarean after 14 hours of labor. And I just think, we don't have to go into a big evolutionary discussion, but I think occasionally about the fact that if I didn't, you know, this didn't happen during a time of modern medicine, and if it was just, you know, whatever many years ago that I had gone through this, he would not have been born, and I may have not made it either. And I wouldn't have passed down my genes, because the baby would not have come out I don't think the baby could have gotten out without a cesarean, because of just my body structure. So it's just an interesting, like, what if, you know, because you think about evolution, you think about, and we talked about IVF versus adoption, and just that there is a strong urge to pass down your genes. And I just think, you know, what if I had lived a long time ago, you know, it wouldn't have happened that way.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, there's some people who give birth to healthy 10-pound babies, no problem, you know, so I think it really differs, and we're lucky to live in a time where, you know, you can get a cesarean right away, and, you know, for a lot of women that's not an option, you know, and they lose their life over something as easy to fix as that.
Meaning in other countries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously we talked about some of the issues, but what's the normal progression? You know, is it first pain first, bloody show first? You know, obviously a lot of women have seen a lot of movies, some have read a lot of books, but, you know, if you were kind of going on the schedule of what is to be expected, what would be some of those markers you'd want to hit?
Yeah, I think I don't remember what's the actual progression, but for me it was I was having dinner with Will's parents, and I went to the bathroom to pee and pulled my underwear down and saw what I thought looked like a dead slug in my underpants, and flipped out, called Billy from dinner. I'm like, you've got to see this, and showed him, and it was my mucus plug, and it was just amazing. Like, everybody should see one. Every woman should see it. It's unbelievable. And so that was my first indication, but I didn't go into labor until like a week after that. So I thought it was like, oh, tonight I'm going to go to labor. I packed my bag, you know, but it didn't happen for another week. And what I say, and I know this is, you know, not probably founded on fact, but I was reading that blog or that Tumblr, that, you know, beep my dad says, you know, the crap my dad says. Do you guys know that one?
Yes.
I heard it, yeah.
And it was just so funny. I was laughing so hard. It was my due date. It was the night before my due date, like 11:50 p.m. And Will and I were in bed just cracking up. And the second it hit 12:01, I got like this sort of feeling that I had to go poop. And so I went to the bathroom and I tried, and nothing happened. And he's like, I think you're going into labor. And I'm like, who goes to labor on their due date for the first time pregnancy? Nobody. And so I thought it was just, I was like constipated or I don't know what. And but I think it was all that laughing. I swear to God, that had something to do with me starting labor.
Oh.
And then my water broke 12 hours later. So I went to the hospital and in so much pain, and they gave me morphine and sent me back home because my water hadn't broken and I wasn't dilated enough. So as soon as the water breaks, the hospital has to admit you. But before that, you know, they don't have to. So.
Okay. So I thought that maybe what would be neat to kind of, as we sort of head towards the end of the pregnancy topic, is to talk about maybe anything else, Scarlett, that you think is important about the first few months after the baby's here, and anything about breastfeeding and going back to work if people
Because women have serious feelings about breastfeeding.
yeah.
It is like a bloody fight, actually.
Yeah. So I think that I had prepared myself so much and was so into like the, very yogic, bonding with my fetus sort of thing, that when I gave birth, I wasn't really mentally prepared. And nobody thinks that postpartum depression is going to happen to them, and so you're like, I'm going to skip this chapter in the book and go on to whatever. So I wasn't really prepared for how life-changing, sort of in a bad way, it was. I mean, a lot of women lay eyes on their baby and they're just like, I love this little thing so much. I didn't really feel that way. I felt nervous, anxious. It was a really, even though he was allowed to room with me, he wasn't latching on, and when he did, he just like tore my nipples apart, and it was really, really painful for me to breastfeed him, and so I couldn't bond with him that way. And so it took me a very long time to fall in love with my baby. And it's sort of like being in a relationship with a man or a significant other where you go on your first date and you're like, okay, I kind of like this, and let's see how the second date goes. That's how each month was for me until about 6 or 7 months that I was like, I would do anything for this kid. But that was how long the adjustment was for me. So that was one thing that I wish somebody would have talked to me about in more depth to prepare me for, and how lonely it can be to be at home alone with your baby for that long. And I forget who it was, if it was Summer or Jill, that said, like talking to other women, to other mothers, and going out with them really, really helps. And even though it's isolated somewhat because you're in just like a mommy community, it's really helpful to hear other stories and other people saying like, oh, that was really rough for me too. And then about school, I was a full-time PhD student the whole way through my pregnancy. I went back to school a few weeks after I gave birth, and just made it work. Finishing my PhD was really, really important to me. And right now I'm part stay-at-home mom and part, PhD student. So I'm doing classes online and I'm writing my dissertation. For me, it was really important to have that sort of aspect of myself still intact, because I'm not like I don't feel that being a mother is a job per se. It's a part of who I am just as much as being a PhD student or doing the kind of research I like to do is a part of who I am. So that was a pretty easy decision for me. And then breastfeeding, I did breastfeed for about 7 months, and I got mastitis, and it was the worst experience of my life, and decided I'm done. I've tried so hard. I'm over the guilt of the whole formula breastfeeding thing, and I supplemented him with formula from 7 to 12 months. And
7 months is fantastic.
Yeah, they say, the first 6 months exclusive breastfeeding, so I did that, and I was really happy. I wanted to go a year, but I couldn't. I really, 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 really tried, and I couldn't. But it's just so much animosity towards breastfeeding, and I was totally a proponent of, whip it out, do it in public, be discreet, but there's no need to hide it unnecessarily from other people. There's a quote that this woman said that she was breastfeeding, and some guy turned around and was looking at her and asked her, do you mind? And she's like, no, not at all. And she handed him her, like, the little blanket, and she's like, here, this is for you. And he's like, for what? And she said, to cover your face, So that's kind of how I feel about people's sort of revulsion or bad feelings towards breastfeeding. That's what breasts are for, and it's a natural thing, and children should be exposed to it and view it as a normal thing, and it's nothing else.
What I wonder too, though, is like, how much of it is just that people don't like to see breasts in public? Like, how much of this is like an extension of the whole like Janet Jackson wardrobe debacle, where like people are just like, oh, a breast in public, you're profaning my child, it's pornographic.
Yeah. It's there's some people that like on like breastfeeding forums, they're just like, well, it's okay if a mom's breastfeeding as long as she doesn't show her nipple. And it's like, okay, I think it's just our culture has overly sexualized them, and we are very just growing up as a child in the United States. That seeing breasts is something that you shouldn't see, and you should cover up if you're a girl, and you should be sort of ashamed to let other people see it. And so you grow up with that, not seeing them for what they're meant to do. there's a little bit of a shame, a social shame attached to breasts, and I think that's kind of sad, I mean, I'm not a proponent for whipping them out all the time, but if a woman's breastfeeding in public, I don't think that she should be persecuted for it, or, I mean, her rights should be definitely protected for doing so.
I had kind of complex feelings on it. Like, I definitely don't like to see women's nipples when they're breastfeeding. I appreciate it when they have a blanket, but I also understand you have to do it every 2 hours. And, anybody who's ever nannied before knows that when you leave the house with a baby, half the time you don't have everything you need. You wish you did, but you don't, like, especially not at first, and I wonder sometimes, like, I've never felt comfortable judging other women for what you do, because you have to feed your baby, and it's just like anything else in life that is natural but also inconvenient, even down to, like, going to the bathroom. Like, mishaps are going to occur, things are going to happen, and I feel like, I also lived in Spain for a while where people are topless at the beach all summer long, every beach. So, like, a part of me wonders, like, I don't know whether or not I think that's good, but I do know that, like, you can't control when you're going to need to breastfeed and what you're going to have on you. And sure, I'd prefer if I didn't see it, but I'm not going to judge you if you don't have those same hang-ups about it,
Right.
I agree with Summer. I just wanted to jump in. I just agree that, I agree with Scarlett that it's just, America is so, the sexualization of breasts, and especially as it relates to breastfeeding. I mean, breastfeeding is not sexual. So I just think that...
Isn't that a problem, they say, Jill, sometimes that doctors have, or that men have actually, after women have babies, is all of a sudden they don't see the boobs as sexual anymore, and then it becomes like this whole reinvention of the mother?
I think so. And what's funny about in my household is that my children, how do I say this? They have the perception that breasts are for milk. Like, that's the purpose. Like, they don't understand a sexual connotation of breasts yet. And I think that a lot of kids their age do understand that maybe a little bit more, because of TV, it's just much more TV, or their parents, someone's talking about boobs and big boobs and, just more talking about it. And I don't know, we haven't discussed it so much, other than the fact that they know that it has to do with feeding a baby, and they don't remember, because even my older guy, he was only 2.5 to 3. I don't think he really remembers me breastfeeding his younger sister. They just think it has to do with milk. It's actually very cute. And so yesterday, my daughter put on my bra when, like, I was, getting into the shower, and it was just there I had thrown it on the floor, and she put it on, and she was walking around talking about something about her milk. And I thought that was cute, that's what she thinks of about breasts. Now, that will change so much, but I just think that, the man in the restaurant, what does he feel uncomfortable about, really? I mean, it has to do more with him than it has to do with the woman sitting there breastfeeding, probably as discreetly as she can. And if there were more places where you could go into a women's restroom, because I remember, like, thinking, I'm going to go see what the bathroom looks like in this restaurant, or in this, wherever we were, in this shopping place, and see if I can go sit in there and breastfeed. Well, you know what? It's very rare that there is a comfortable place to go in a public place. So it would be the car. You go sit in the car to do it, or else if you found a good spot in a corner of a restaurant. But for me, it was more often in the car, because there was I don't know if this is different in Europe, or obviously Europe is different just in the way that they deal with women's bodies and topless beaches. But I wonder if it's other countries are a little better about having that place to go, because here we don't have that. There's no place to go to breastfeed, so you sort of get stuck.
Yeah, it's really sad. I know in Finland, it's it's a very much protected right that women can breastfeed anywhere, and they have stations set up in every public place for women to breastfeed. It's just sad when women feel like if you're okay with it and you want to breastfeed in a bathroom, then that's fine, as long as you're okay with it. But when you feel like you have to, because of societal pressure, to breastfeed your child in a bathroom, like, who else would want to eat in a bathroom? Nobody. So why should people people expect your child to enjoy that, or you to enjoy feeding your child in a bathroom, you know. It gets kind of sad, so.
It is sad. And I think the car is fine if you have your car available. It's not the most comfortable thing probably for the mom and the baby, but that's what I did more often than not, is when I was out, is just get in the car and in the back seat and just do what I had to do. But interesting. It's a good thing to talk. It's a great subject. I feel like we could do a whole show just on breastfeeding because there's so much, like Holly said, there's so much animosity. There's so much polarization about it.
Yeah, and you know what? I think it's important to have the conversation over and over and over again, because the more we talk about it, the more we can define what society's doing. The more that we can make it something that women are comfortable talking about. It's one of the things with this podcast is there's a lot of things that women deal with that we're not comfortable talking about because we're trying to make the field even. And I think a big part of the problem with that is that the field's not even, and if we don't talk about it, we're not going to be able to even it out.
That's excellent. I agree. The field is not even, and unfortunately, I didn't figure that out as early as I wish I did. I think that that's one thing that we can all teach our daughters, as our sons, as they grow up, is that it's not even, and that we do. I think when we're young women, we spend a lot of time trying to make it that way, and that's one of my things. Like as I kind of had my children and have gone through my 30s, where I'm like, wow, it's not. There's a lot of basic biological inequality that I never realized that I would have to deal with.
Yeah, it's very true, and I guess is a good way to segment into our chick news for this week. So obviously there's been a lot of talk over the last month about Beyonce's new baby, and obviously her pregnancy was just riddled with is she, isn't she. We talked, there's apparently her stomach collapsed in on itself in an interview, and so people were thinking maybe she was adopting the baby or something. Maybe she wasn't really pregnant. So I'm just really curious about when a woman is pregnant in the spotlight. I wonder sometimes if that just adds another level of stress to the situation. But also, was Beyonce ever pregnant? I'm just curious to know what you girls think.
I'm gonna let Scarlett go first.
Well, she is the guest.
Yes, that guest first.
I think she was. I mean, that's a lot to go. I know there was a lot of people pissed off because she, they monopolized a whole wing of a hospital or whatever, and people couldn't see their babies, and I don't know, just what rich people do, I guess. And so I don't think they would have gone through all that if she had adopted a kid. So I think that she did. And I can't imagine being famous and having people always asking. I mean, it's, there's always that whole thing about pregnant women and other women touching pregnant women's bellies, and it's sort of like that same thing, like all this weird anonymous attention on you and what's going on inside of your body is something that's very personal, and you're getting fat and you're bloated one day, and it's just like you're going through this such an important time with with everybody's eyes on you, and it's such a personal time. I'm sure it causes a lot of stress and anxiety, and I wouldn't want to do it if I was famous.
Well, I was thinking too, when the whole buying out a wing thing, I'm sorry. I mean, after being there when my sister had her baby, and the second time she actually went to a specialist who deals in difficult pregnancies, just in case there were any problems the second time, she wanted to be ready. And, so they treated the second baby very different than the first. And I learned a lot in life because I'm the younger sister, watching my big sister go through things. And if I could afford to buy my own wing, you better, but with a fancy McSchmancerson $1 million room, you better believe I'd do it. Because you want that to be, like you said, the most peaceful, comfortable, emergency prepared environment possible. Because I have learned having a baby is life and death. I mean, life, death, poop, all in one place. So yeah, if I could afford it, I'd do it too. And I'd like to hate on them for what they did, but I can't say that I wouldn't love the privacy, love the safety, and really be all for it if I was Beyonce.
I agree. I think that I guess I don't know if they did this hospital have to turn people away because of space? I mean, I don't know. But it seems like if you can afford that VIP treatment, then why not?
Yeah, why not? That's how I feel.
I'd like to disagree with you, Holly, but I can't.
That's actually interesting because I'm sure this is the complete opposite perspective the entire media has been giving. And somebody said that like apparently the rumor was false that a parent had been not able to see their baby during that time. At least that's the most recent thing that I've read. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I hope nobody else was inconvenienced by them being there, but I certainly can say that if I had the money, I would do it in a heartbeat because when it comes down to that, and I know you girls could speak to this better than me, but you do the best thing you can to protect your young.
You do. Yeah. You do. And I think it's, well, right. I was just going to go back to that idea of the sort of those first few months where you kind of, you fall in love and you become that instinct to protect. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And of course, speaking of another diva who actually these two both sang at last, and it was a huge scandal. Etta James died this week. And
yeah.
I don't know. I was a huge fan, so I was actually pretty devastated.
Well, I have a funny thing that I heard about her, and I know you did mention it, Holly, and I thought I heard a little bit on NPR about her yesterday, and it's kind of apropos for our topic tonight, because she sang love songs, right? Sexy, like very, very romantic type of things, and one of the quotes that I heard about her yesterday was that Etta James keeps our species alive. And I thought that was so cute because I'm like, we're going to be talking about getting pregnant.
Oh, I love that. Well, and I love I actually have the story open so I can say how old she was. 73 when she died. And I think it was probably actually on NPR that I heard this, but it might have been someone who I actually met. But they said they saw her perform live, and it was a guy, and he said she was performing the song, and she's the 70-whatever-year-old woman at the time, and that she's singing the song, and he's like, it was dirty. He's like, it was sexual, And who gets to be sexual into their 70s?
Good for her.
So yeah. I thought that was great, and I'm sad that she went, but I hope she went singing, at least to the very last moment. And thanks for coming, Scarlett. Is there any last thoughts you want to share before we close up today?
No, I had a lot of fun. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming, and
yeah.
I guess, Jill, if it's okay with you, I'll end out with our Etta James quote.
Yeah, that sounds good, and we'll see everyone will be back hopefully next week for our next Crash and Glass show.
And in between now and then, if you want to go to basenettv.com and donate money for the show, we would love to have every dollar. We'll try to give you a shout out on the next show. You can hear your name on the podcast. For every dollar, we'll say it one time, and let's see how many dollars we can get from that. I may have to amend that if the dollars really come rolling in. I'd love for that to happen, by the way. So, go donate, listen to our other shows, do all that you can, help keep us alive out there. And so I guess we're going to go out from one singer to another. Our Etta James quote here before we go into Marissa Levy's Breathing Fire is, "My mother always wanted me to be a jazz singer, but I always wanted to be raunchy." Thank you, ladies. Have a great week.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm breathing fire, I'm baring teeth, and I'm cutting veins so I can make sure that you're bleeding.